It's a woman's worst nightmare.
He was grabbing something from his pocket, which looked like a switchblade.
She's being followed by a stranger.
My worst fear is sex trafficking or abduction.
This is terrifying.
But she fights back.
My intuition was right. This man, he's done it before.
And coming up later, a vicious attack on a child.
He just sucker punches this kid out of nowhere.
Why did I do it?
Who else is in danger?
Do they have guns? I have kids with me.
Wednesday, March 17th, 2021. Just after 5 p.m., Vancouver, Canada. 26-year-old Jamie Coots is heading home after a quick trip to the drugstore.
I'm walking directly downtown, probably the nicest part of Vancouver. About halfway home, I could feel somebody walking really close behind me. When I was looking at my phone, I can kind of feel that they're just stopped there.
Jamie feels uneasy, so she looks behind her to try and get a better look at the person.
He's maybe 155 pounds. He's a small guy. I would say 5'7", 5'8", a little bit darker skin, darker hair, dark eyes.
Besides his eyes, Jamie can't see the man's face. It's completely hidden by his sweatshirt hood and mask.
This is very typical of someone who has ill intent. They want to be incognito so that all of their really poignant features aren't highlighted, especially their face.
I put my phone away and looked up and said, "You're walking too close to me." And the man, he didn't say anything to me, so I was like, okay, that's weird.
The stranger is clearly following Jamie. But why?
It's possible that this stalker was trying to figure out where she lives, where she works, who she was meeting up with, trying to gain as much information about her as possible.
I think he was waiting for a reaction from me to try calling 911, to running, to screaming.
If Jamie calls 911, will the man hear and get angry? Instead, she decides to turn on her phone's camera.
My only thought was, you can't go home. And so that's why my body told me to record what's happening. I truly thought that that would kind of deter him a little bit. I could call the police, but that couple of seconds in between stopping the recording and trying to make the phone call, he could have approached me. And then that would be the access point to come grab me.
When you're in a situation like this, you're thinking, I'm either going to survive or I'm not. And so she's thinking, what can I use? What are my weapons? For someone who's a civilian who doesn't carry around weapons, your phone can be quite powerful because of that camera. So this was really quick thinking on her part. So at least she has this guy on film. If something happens to her.
I took my phone and I held it like this, up as high as I could, so him and everybody else could see that I was recording. That way I could have a plain view of what's in front of me and how far he is behind me.
But whoever this man is, and whatever he wants, the camera doesn't stop him.
He did not care at all. He looked the camera straight. He was not scared of being filmed. He has no intention of giving up. He's walking at an extremely quick pace, and you can see him kind of double step. I walked through a red light at one point, just as the light's changing, and he keep up with me. I'm definitely scared. It's the first nice day, but I'm still in a big winter jacket, and I'm walking on the verge of running, so I'm covered in sweat. My t-shirt was soaking wet. You can see him in multiple parts of the video wiping his face like this, trying to keep up with me. I continue to walk, and what should have been a 10-minute walk quickly turned into about 30 minutes. There's absolutely no other space to wonder what's going to happen next, because I'm absolutely consumed with what my next move is going to be. I'm shaking. My adrenaline's definitely at its peak.
Jamie needs to outrun or outwit the man who is following her as fast as she can.
My worst fear is sex trafficking or abduction. In Vancouver, we do have a big sex trafficking issue. We are one of the main ports, and there's been a huge amount of women going missing in the area. All I wanted more than anything was to go home, but I didn't want him to know anywhere close to where I lived. I decide that it's in my best interest to, one, continue reporting, and two, get somewhere that's highly populated. That's when it popped into my head, you know what, I'm gonna go to the skate park. There's a lot of people there. And if this man decided to do anything, there would be so much eyes. I went right to the absolute center of the skate park, thinking that he wasn't gonna follow me in, and he continued to follow.
Nothing is stopping this man, and Jamie is panicked.
I'm just trying to look for the biggest group of people and hope to get help.
Hey, do you mind if I sit with you guys? This guy's literally been following me in circles for like 40 minutes, and I've been recording it. And he's literally just standing behind me, and I don't know his issue.
Yeah, that's cool. Why don't you just pull up and sit?
But even when Jamie sits down, the stalker doesn't go away.
In the video, you can see he's either holding something or he's got fists in his jacket pockets because his hands are in there, and he's trying to pull his fists out, but having kind of a hard time.
Does this man have a weapon? What does he want?
He's probably sizing up the situation to see if he could ultimately take her or attack her. This is terrifying. Had she not gone to a group of people, maybe we would not have seen her again.
The man lingers for a few minutes, but as more and more skaters turn to watch him, he finally leaves.
You can see him start to walk away, and then one of the girls who was skateboarding there tried to approach him, but he continued to walk away.
Now, all Jamie wants to do is get home. But she's paralyzed with fear.
I saw the direction that he walked off in, and when I was ready, I made the mission home, but I had eyes all around me the entire time. I called the police and I let them know what happened. I give them a description of the man and screenshot a couple images from the video I had taken. Later that evening, I decided it's probably kind of important if I post this to social media. My initial thought was, if I post this, maybe somebody would be like, oh, I've seen that guy.
To Jamie's shock, she isn't the only one who's had interactions with this stalker.
I had a huge amount of people come forward saying that they've had similar situations in the past. And then about 4 women say that they were stalked very recently by somebody who appeared to look like the same man.
This is very disturbing because when someone is a serial stalker, that means that they're thinking about what they're going to do to their victims. And that means that it doesn't stop at one person.
One of the women, Nani Gonzalez, is actually from within Jamie's own circle of friends.
10 seconds into the video, I was just like, oh my God, this was the same person that had recently followed me.
Fortunately, Gonzalez says she was able to avoid the man and lost him before she reached her home.
By the next morning, I had hundreds of messages asking me to go public.
Social media sleuths are eager to help Jamie figure out who the man is.
People wanted to figure out exactly who he was, messaging me all kinds of crazy things that I didn't even notice to look out for. Hey, did you notice there was a car with the back window unrolled?
They also point out something Jamie never saw. It looks like the stalker had something in his hand.
He was grabbing something from his pocket and putting it into his satchel, which looked like a switchblade or maybe a box cutter. And you see him at one point get caught off guard by another girl that he keeps kind of looking back at. And I was told by many people that she kind of had a similar look to me. And so I wonder if there's a specific type of woman that maybe he tries to go for. It wasn't until I had posted it to social media that I realized, okay, my intuition was right on knowing that this man, he's done it before, he's gonna do it again.
Just a few days after Jamie posts her video, the Vancouver police apprehend a suspect who they believe is connected to the disturbing stalking incidents. He is charged with criminal harassment for Jamie's incident.
We're very pleased that we were able to arrest the right person in this case.
Social media is amazing these days. You can put something on there and really reach a lot of people.
The ordeal has left Jamie shaken and constantly on alert.
I think about it all the time. You really don't expect what happened to happen in broad daylight. I think that your gut is the most important thing in the whole world. From my experience, I've learned that if something doesn't feel right, to trust it.
And she hopes talking about her experience
Also trying to process what had just happened.
will help honor those who weren't as fortunate as she was.
I was super lucky. There's a lot of women going missing. I don't want those people to be forgotten. And so I use this as an opportunity to speak out for them.
In Missouri, a brave young boy is also speaking out after a frightening attack. Friday, July 3rd, 2020. Downtown Cape Girardeau, Missouri, 11:40 p.m. A youth hip-hop group shows off their moves.
We were performing downtown, which is a few blocks over from our studio. It was a very usual thing for us to do on the weekends, just to bring in some extra money for the kiddos.
12-year-old Ethan Hagler, known in the group as E-Man, is one of the students participating in the street performance.
It's not abnormal for Ethan to be out with his friends on a non-school night past 10. It was 4th of July weekend. Ethan went off with his dance friends, just go hang out and dance and be in the downtown atmosphere.
There's a lot of people there. They would walk by and like see us dancing, but we would make sure they don't like stay too close to us.
We're DJing, we're having fun, we're talking to people, and with all the positive energy flowing, I decided to turn on my Facebook Live to show everyone. That's what we do.
We just let it record, and we just start dancing, we start DJing.
I'd seen several cars that were just circling around the block, which was normal.
But within 10 minutes, their night takes a sudden and terrifying turn.
This kid is dancing, and he's having a good time, and this car abruptly stops, and this man gets out of the car,
and he starts to dance along with us. He gets close, and I see him rear back, and
with no warning, the man attacks Ethan.
he just sucker punches this kid out of nowhere.
Ethan's attacker never says a word. He just punches the 12-year-old brutally in the face, then bolts.
I ran after the guy. I tried to catch him, and I saw two other people in the car.
This instructor is in a really precarious situation. He's there to protect these minors.
I'm thinking, do they have guns? I have kids with me. Should I pursue this guy?
Everyone is in shock and in terror.
I remember getting hit. I fell over, and then I blacked out. And then I woke up, and I was crowded with people around me. I was very confused, I was very shocked. And I was like, what just happened? And I didn't know what to do. Blood was going all over the place. Michael immediately called my mom. She ran straight for me. She kept on saying that she was sorry, but she wasn't there.
The bouncers at the bar across the street, I kind of waved at them, come here, come here, come here, and they're right on it. They brought out ice, they brought out water to help wash off the blood, and made sure that E-Man was okay. They also called 911 for us.
That's when Ethan sees the video of what just happened.
Michael, He gave me the phone and showed me what happened. When I saw me fall, I was like, dang. The cop asked me some questions, and then my mom took me straight to the closest hospital.
They immediately went and did an MRI.
The doctors told me that I had a seriously bad concussion.
In the ER, Ethan's mom sees the video for the first time.
I was instantly so angry that I felt hot. We watched it over and over and over. And he said, I just want to understand why this happened.
Why did I get it?
By Sunday, 2 days after the attack, hundreds of Facebook users have shared Michael Curry's video. It's viewed more than 970,000 times.
The grown man is attacking a boy from behind. That's cause for outrage and anger. Is this a gang attack, an initiation of some sort? There's something that seems premeditated about this.
A family wants your help identifying this man in the photo behind me.
I did not expect this video to become viral like it did.
It spread like wildfire.
It was shared, it was commented on, and people contacted the police.
Within just 1 day, the viral video gives police a critical tip: the name of the suspect.
Breaking at 5, this 27-year-old Cape Girardeau man.
The video, it was on the news in Paducah, in Cape County, in St. Louis County, CNN, TMZ, the New York Times. It was everywhere. It was just comment, comment, comment. This is Cedric Moore. This is Cedric Moore. This is Cedric Moore.
The police definitely knew who he was because his other crimes that he's committed.
He was on probation currently for a domestic assault where he beat up his girlfriend.
So many tips come into the police, it makes it easy for them to find Cedric Moore Jr.
They contacted the police about his whereabouts and about his past. Eventually, he had nowhere left to hide. He turned himself in within a week.
No one else who was in the car is ever identified. But Moore's bond is set at $50,000, cash only.
I felt so relieved. I cried. I was so grateful.
I'm glad it was recorded and his face was seen.
Without the camera rolling that night, I don't think the suspect would have been caught.
10 months later, Ethan faces his attacker in court as he is charged with second-degree assault. Moore refuses to say Ethan's name out loud and offers no explanation for his actions.
I asked Ethan 3 or 4 times, I said, how are you handling this so well? He looked me in the eye and he said, he can't hurt me anymore. The deal that was offered was that we would drop the child endangerment in exchange for him pleading to the assault charge. So his probation has been revoked and he has to do the 4 years for that prior assault. And then he got 7 years for the assault on my son. When he is released,
I'm gonna be around 21 maybe.
There will be a restraining order that Mr. Moore can never ever come anywhere near Ethan ever again without immediately going right back to jail.
I just really hope the lesson that he learns is powerful enough to make him change paths to a more positive life.
Ethan still isn't fully recovered.
I still get multiple headaches, and it's hard for me to sleep. School is hard for me as well.
He sees a therapist every week. He was diagnosed with PTSD. His vision has probably been permanently damaged.
But he is determined never to allow that night to crush his dreams. And now performs on a national level.
Ethan dances 5 nights a week, competes on the weekends, travels all over.
We focus on the arts, and with art comes confidence. When you can show a kid that they are bigger than they think they are, you're showing them a path to being a positive adult. He's a really big role model for a lot of kids around here.
If you want to follow your dreams, then keep on going. Don't stop and don't let anyone bring you down.
Uber drivers choked and bitten by a passenger.
When a driver is violently assaulted by his passenger,
I'll never forget the face she made at me.
She's choking him,
refusing to let go of him.
he fears for his life and the lives of others on the road.
The driver being attacked from behind turns that vehicle into a possible missile.
I want my money back.
And later, a restaurant customer goes into a rage.
This is hangry to the next level.
And all hell breaks loose.
Things get really ugly.
I don't know what this guy was gonna do.
It was scary.
It's a shocking crime that makes headlines.
Disturbing weekend attack on a local Uber driver.
He was scratched, strangled, and bitten by his passenger.
And we want to warn you, it's not easy to watch.
It all starts on April 15th, 2021 in Tampa, Florida. Michael Hassey is a welder by trade. To make extra cash on the side, he drives for a popular rideshare company.
I have a full-time job that works me like 55 hours a week, and it was a pretty easy way to make some extra cash.
But Michael knows the job has potential downsides.
Dealing with people that were intoxicated, and people throwing up in my car and being a little rowdy or loud. But yeah, I was driving for about 6 or 7 months. I did close to 500 trips and I never had an issue.
But on this April afternoon, everything changes.
It was a Saturday, so I figured I might as well drive a little bit. Your phone will just ding and say that you have a request from someone. I got the notification around like 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
At the pickup location, Michael finds 2 women, a mother and her daughter.
Her daughter, who was the one who called, and she introduced me to her mom and asked me if I could please get her home safe. I wasn't thinking anything of it. I picked her up from a really nice upscale bar in South Tampa, and she looked like my grandma, like completely normal, just the most average person you've ever seen in your entire life. And she ended up passing out in the back seat, kind of like dozing off. I was driving her for about 20 minutes before she woke up.
That's when Michael realizes something isn't right.
She just kind of like was making weird noises, like grunting sounds, and I asked her, "Are you okay?"
Then something terrifying happens.
She put her hands on me while I was driving the car. This lady is both of her arms wrapped around my neck, choking me out.
She violently attacks her driver, refusing to let go of him.
Michael is stunned and instinctively manages to hit record on his cell phone, which is mounted on his dashboard. He can't understand why this woman is suddenly attacking him.
I've never had someone wake up and just like be in a completely different state of mind. I told her, "Please take your hands off me, I'm gonna call your daughter." And as soon as I said the words, "I'm gonna call your daughter," it was like a switch flip. I could see, I'll never forget the face she made at me through my rearview mirror. Eyes just like solid black, and punched me in the side of the face.
He's in a no-win situation. He took a selfie video because he was afraid that for whatever reason she calls the police, that he would get in trouble.
And it seems this woman is not letting up.
She actually reached over my shoulders and grabbed my forearms while I was driving 50, 60 miles an hour and tried to get me to wreck multiple times. I was having to honk at other cars to get out of the way. All of this is going on while this lady has both of her arms wrapped around my neck. And at this point, I'm just trying to concentrate on driving the car and not wrecking into anyone.
Just think about that for a moment. You're driving 60 miles an hour and she's choking him for a significant amount of time. She's obviously concerned what's going to happen. He doesn't want to pass out while driving, which is even worse.
I had no option to stop the car. I'm in the middle of a major highway.
As the ride continues, Michael can only hope that he makes it to his destination safely. But this woman is about to take her actions to another level.
Stop fighting him!
Stop.
Michael is in a complete panic. He's in danger, and so is everyone else on the road.
A driver of a motor vehicle being attacked from behind, being rendered incapable of driving and steering, turns that vehicle into a possible missile.
Somehow, he manages to get off at an exit and pull into a parking lot.
There was a pizza place right next to where I stopped. I was screaming and honking the horn for help.
Hearing the commotion, restaurant staff soon circle his car.
I just don't want to put my hands on her.
Michael's immediate concern is they don't mistake him for the bad guy.
I wanted everyone to know that I was the victim of this. I know if I would have defended myself and the cops would have pulled up and I'm hitting her in the face or something like that, I don't see myself just, walking away from that.
One person begins filming with their phone, while another calls the cops.
Before I knew it, there were like 10 people outside of the court.
Some people reach through the open window and try to pull the woman off Michael. But his attacker is relentless.
Even when I finally got the car pulled over safely and there was an audience of people watching her, it did not faze her.
Please stop. Please stop.
She continued and even started to amp it up and get more violent.
And then she does something that shocks everyone.
She bit me in the neck.
No, please stop. Stop.
She sinks her teeth a la Mike Tyson into the back of his neck and takes out a $50 sized chunk out of his neck.
She bites him, draws blood.
Stop fighting him!
Stop.
I was just so shocked by what was going on. I really didn't know what to do at all. I was just pretty much getting suffocated for 6 minutes before that, trying to prevent me and her from both getting killed in a car accident. It felt like I had a grown man's arms around my neck. I couldn't pry her arms off.
It's fine.
She's got her entire body weight up against my neck in the seat.
Michael is desperate to get away from the violent woman.
After she bit me, I freed myself up and got out of the car.
He even manages to grab the car keys before the woman tries to drive off, but he is far from okay.
I stood up for a second and I ended up having to sit down to catch my breath because I was literally winded. Having hands around my neck for that long, it almost felt like they were still around my neck.
Stunned by the crazed woman's behavior, everyone jumps in to help.
All the bystanders that were watching surrounded my car and held my doors shut so she couldn't open any of the doors.
We need the cops here now.
At one point, she actually climbs into the front seat and it looked like she was trying to get out through the window.
Don't.
They closed all the doors and tried to keep her inside.
Finally, help arrives.
It took the authorities about 10 minutes to get there. For me, it felt like a lifetime. They took her out of my car and they put her right on the ground and put her in handcuffs. She was giving the cops a really hard time, and in front of the police officers, she threatened to kill me. Then in the back of one of the police cars, she threw up.
The woman is identified as 55-year-old Michelle Stillwell.
She was charged with aggravated battery, which is a felony, and tampering with a witness. So she received 2 felony charges out of this. She could do years in prison.
After the attack, Michael needs medical attention.
I went to the emergency room and got a tetanus shot and a rabies shot. On my discharge paperwork, it said assault victim and human bite. I'm lucky that I had the seat in between me and her because it could have been worse.
I don't want...
And he never gets any explanation for why she targeted him.
Why? I'd love to know what was going on 2 hours before she did that to me.
I have to believe it's extreme intoxication or extreme drug use of some sort. I'm not going to speculate as to specifically why, but gosh, you would seem to think that extreme levels of intoxication would be what fueled this.
The video of the wild ordeal goes viral.
There is new video tonight of a disturbing weekend attack on a local Uber driver.
Yeah, the driver says he was scratched, strangled, and bitten by his passenger.
Exclusive video from a witness asking to remain anonymous shows the Uber driver with his hands up and can be heard saying multiple times, "I can't breathe."
I woke up one day and it was on the news. It's hard for me to watch, to be honest with you.
Michael says he really doesn't like to think about that day anymore. But along with his lawyer, he is using the video to push for more protection for rideshare drivers.
I'm hoping that the rideshare services take an increased safety measure to protect the people driving and the passengers, because I feel like neither party is safe.
And Michael says from now on, he's sticking to his day job.
No, I will never work for a rideshare company ever again. It really was traumatizing.
In California, another raging customer has a whole restaurant in fear.
Hey, wait, what the Well, the wings are supposed to be fiery, not the customers.
Witnesses say the angry confrontation started after a mix-up with the man's order.
Saturday, March 13th, 2021, around 1:45 p.m. Antelope, California. Theron Trujillo, his wife Flor, their 2 kids, and a friend are picking up food from a local restaurant when they notice something odd.
Pulled up to the restaurant, and then we see the other car pull up, and he got out, and he just slammed the door.
The guy seemed very agitated, seemed very angry. He pulled up really quick, and he pretty much ran into the store.
And we were just oh, something's gonna happen.
I'm in a rush. I got my kids at my house. I'm in a rush.
Yeah, when you see someone pacing, you know someone's upset. And that's a really good red flag to not get in that person's path.
While his family waits in the car, Theron cautiously steps into the restaurant.
All I wanted was some ranch.
When my husband went into the restaurant, he's like, "That's not gonna stop me. I still want my ranch. I'm just gonna go get my ranch."
Just in case, he decides to record what happens.
I pull out my phone, I started recording.
Give my money back, please. Thank you.
But when Theron walks in, he only finds what appears to be a frustrated customer.
Okay, well, I understand that. You don't have to call your manager when you serve me my food. I would just like a refund. Well, you just told us that we can replace the chicken. I don't want this order replaced, bro.
It's obvious that the customer has been trying to get his money back for some time and is now at the end of his rope.
I don't want it. I don't like the customer service I got. I just want my money back. That's it.
You know, there's something called hangry, but this is hangry to the next level.
I want my money back. I don't want the food, bro.
The employee patiently tries to explain that they don't offer refunds for online orders.
Where does it say you can't give no refunds up here? Show me where you can't give no refunds at. No, you show me where the it's at.
But that's when the man's exasperation boils over. He slams his fist on the counter, pleading for his money back.
I don't want the food, bro. I don't want to wait another 45 minutes. I don't want her touching I don't want the food, bro. I just want my money back. That's it.
He was just yelling, very upset.
When someone reaches their breaking point and they're heading towards the destruction zone, once that trigger gets flipped, they can flip into a bit of rage.
An hour ago, I don't want the food replaced. You not understand that?
Has their adrenaline surging and their stress hormone called cortisol. That's like a really dangerous combination for a severe anger outburst.
I want my money back, bro. That's it. I want my money back.
As the man's voice gets louder, other employees back away.
They're probably really afraid. I don't think they saw this coming.
I want to take my business somewhere else.
But the cashier he's arguing with refuses to back down. And this standoff clearly isn't ending anytime soon.
Okay, give me my money back. My manager told me not to. Bro.
The man working behind the counter, he's trying his best to reason with this man, but he won't have it.
That's it.
So this man has definitely hit his breaking point. Nothing that this restaurant staff can say to him is going to make him happy in any way.
I didn't do anything wrong. I was just asking for a refund.
I was like, this night might not be good.
It's that simple, bro. It's that simple. I know that. Okay.
Is the man just exasperated? Or is this going to get worse?
I need my money back.
When someone's already at this level of anger, they could start hurting other people.
Give me what's mine. Thank you. I don't want the food. I want what's mine. I don't want to wait for no order. No. Give me my money back, bro. That's it.
My manager said I can't do no refund.
Why you can't do no refund?
I asked my manager it was an order from my owner. We can't do no refunds. All we can do is give you the food.
I don't want the food. I don't want to wait. I don't have time to wait on the food again.
Okay.
Okay, so now what do we do?
It's either you get the food remade and you go on about your day and stop yelling at my other manager because that's uncalled for.
And that's when things get out of control.
Things get really ugly from here.
He threw a sign, almost hit me.
This is scary, and nobody knows what this man is thinking.
Does he have a knife? Does he have a gun? We don't know what this guy's next move is.
You don't want the cops, bro. Hey, trust me, I got a businessman, bro. Hey, bro, no. What the do you mean you taking me my money back? Hey.
The raging customer has had enough. He picks up the cash register, crashing it to the floor, along with everything inside. That's when Theron decides to try and intervene.
First gets to that level, there's not much you could do.
But what the man does next scares everyone.
What the do you mean you taking me my money back? Hey, we don't need it for
He has thrown the register right into the window, storming out through a pile of shattered glass.
Bro.
And no one knows what this man will do next.
What if there was a gun in his car? He could have come back and started shooting. Anyone who engages with this guy is putting themselves at risk, because if someone wants to, destroy property, the next thing in their path is going to get destroyed too.
Watching it all from the back seat of the car outside, Theron's wife is scared.
My husband was still in there, and I was like, why is he taking so long to get out of the store? Like, this man already left. You don't know if he's gonna come back with something else.
But with the man gone, Theron races back to his family.
I was definitely worried about what's gonna happen next.
Everyone is shaken.
The register went flying. It didn't even land in the sidewalk. It landed in the parking lot. We were gonna park directly behind that same window, but we didn't. If we would have, that register would have flown right into our windshield.
I don't know what this guy was gonna do. He could have grabbed a gun.
I don't know if he was gonna be in the store and take hostage of people. I don't know what he's gonna do. I was worried that he was gonna get in his car and drive into the store, because he already threw the register out of the window. What's driving his car into the other window gonna do to him? Nothing. He's just gonna drive in, drive back out, and leave.
The couple's young children are terrified.
It was scary for my son, because he asked, "Is Daddy okay?"
Employees inside the store call the police, but the man disappears before they arrive.
I think he was more scared that he just wanted to get out of there. He stormed out and got into his car and just like backed up fast and took off.
And Theron and his family are in just as much of a rush to leave.
I didn't want to stick around. I don't know if this guy's gonna come back. I don't know what his intentions are.
She's like, let's get out of here. We got the kids in the back.
He could come back with a couple of friends. How far is he willing to go? We just don't know.
Once he is safely at home, Theron decides to post the wild video on social media.
I'm gonna post it on TikTok and see where that goes.
And it took off from there.
That had like 10,000 views, like really quick. Facebook had 6.4 million.
A video has gone viral after capturing the moment an angry customer vandalized the inside of a Wingstop restaurant in California.
But this boarded up window behind me shows where things got heated.
Thanks for joining
us. A
us.
lot of news stations and everyone started posting.
And then he started getting phone calls. He started getting emails from people that wanted to share his video on TV.
Theron says
my parents and everyone started to contact me like, hey, I seen you on TV again, and it was pretty interesting.
The angry customer was never identified, and police are still trying to figure out who he is. But if they do catch him, he's in for a rude shock.
He may have to pay thousands of dollars for that botched order of wings. Damage to the store was upwards of $6,000. And vandalism with damages that high can be considered a felony.
Theron and Flora say they just hope the video offers a lesson to others.
Don't be doing things that you don't want to be caught on camera.
It's not worth it. It's not worth the headache. It's not worth the money. It's not worth, getting
On the morning
a criminal
of September
record for it.
29th,
It's just not worth it.
Thousands of families across the Chicago metropolitan area began their day exactly as they had countless times before. Parents prepared breakfast while children got ready for school. Office workers hurried through their morning routines before leaving for work. Medicine cabinets were opened without hesitation, and small white and red bottles of extra-strength Tylenol sat quietly on bathroom shelves and kitchen counters. They represented comfort, reliability, and relief. For millions of Americans, Tylenol was not simply a pain reliever. It was a household necessity, a product trusted enough to be given to children, spouses, parents, and grandparents without a second thought. No one imagined that an ordinary bottle of medicine could become an instrument of murder. Even less imaginable was the possibility that a stranger, someone who had never spoken to the victims and perhaps had never even seen them, could transform one of America's most trusted products into a weapon capable of killing within minutes. That quiet September morning would mark the beginning of one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in American history. Unlike many notorious murder cases, there would be no dramatic confrontation between killer and victim, no eyewitness describing a suspicious stranger, no weapon left at a crime scene, and no clear motive pointing investigators toward a single suspect. Instead, death arrived silently, hidden inside a familiar gelatin capsule that looked identical to every other capsule in the bottle. The victims never saw danger approaching because danger had already been waiting for them inside their own homes. By the time authorities understood what was happening, 7 innocent people had already lost their lives. Panic had spread across an entire nation. And one simple question echoed through every police station, hospital, newsroom, and family living room in America: if medicine could no longer be trusted, what could? The Chicago Tylenol murders remain one of the most unsettling, unsolved cases in the history of the United States because they shattered something far greater than a sense of physical safety. They shattered confidence in ordinary life. Most murder investigations begin with a victim and eventually lead detectives toward a suspect through relationships, motives, or physical evidence. This investigation unfolded in the opposite direction. Detectives first had to understand how people who had never met one another, who lived in different neighborhoods, who came from different backgrounds, and who visited different stores could all die in nearly identical circumstances? The answer would reveal a method so frighteningly simple that it changed the way consumer products are packaged throughout the world. The events unfolded over only a few days between September 29th and October 1st, 1982. Yet their consequences have lasted for more than 4 decades. Even today, nearly every bottle of over-the-counter medication sold in pharmacies carries multiple layers of tamper-evident protection. Plastic shrink wrap around the cap, foil seals beneath the lid, and security bands surrounding the bottle have become so common that most consumers barely notice them. Few stop to wonder why those protective barriers exist. Fewer still realize that those simple safety features trace their origins back to 7 ordinary people whose lives ended because someone exploited a weakness that almost no one had ever considered. At the beginning of the 1980s, America was experiencing a period of growing confidence in mass-produced consumer goods. National brands occupied supermarket shelves from coast to coast. Families developed loyalty to products that had earned their trust over years of reliable use. Among those products, extra-strength Tylenol stood near the very top. Manufactured by McNeil Consumer Products, a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson, Tylenol had become the country's best-selling non-prescription pain reliever, controlling approximately 35 to 37% of the market. Doctors recommended it. Pharmacists stocked it prominently. Television advertisements reinforced its image as a safe and dependable solution for everyday pain and fever. It was common to find a bottle inside nearly every American home. Parents reached for it when a child developed a fever. Adults relied on it after long workdays or during seasonal illnesses. Elderly patients used it to ease chronic aches and pains. The brand had become synonymous with trust itself. Yet hidden behind that success was a vulnerability almost nobody recognized. In 1982, over-the-counter medicine bottles were packaged very differently from the products consumers know today. A customer could walk into a store, pick up a bottle of Tylenol, twist off the cap, remove several capsules, close the bottle again, and place it back on the shelf. There was no foil seal beneath the lid. There was no plastic shrink wrap around the cap. There was no tamper-evident band designed to reveal whether the bottle had already been opened. Retailers had little reason to suspect such precautions were necessary because acts of product tampering on this scale were virtually unheard of. Consumers assumed that if a bottle appeared closed, it was safe. Manufacturers shared that assumption. Law enforcement shared it as well. The trust placed in these everyday products was so complete that almost no one imagined an individual would deliberately poison medicine after it had already left the factory. Somewhere within the Chicago metropolitan area, however, someone recognized that vulnerability. Investigators would later conclude that the killer likely purchased several bottles of extra-strength Tylenol, opened the gelatin capsules by hand, removed their original contents, replaced the medication with potassium cyanide, carefully reassembled the capsules, closed the bottles, and quietly returned them to store shelves at multiple retail locations. The bottles looked untouched. The capsules appeared completely normal. Nothing about their appearance warned customers that they had become deadly. Unlike traditional murderers who stalk their victims or select targets based on personal relationships, this individual created a deadly chain of events and simply walked away. The victims would unknowingly complete the crime themselves by purchasing the poisoned bottles and swallowing the capsules inside their own homes. That method made the murders especially terrifying because anyone could have become a victim. Age did not matter. Occupation did not matter. Wealth, neighborhood, or family background offered no protection. The only requirement was purchasing the wrong bottle at the wrong time. It was murder by chance, committed against complete strangers whose only connection was their trust in a familiar product. As September 29th began, None of this was known. Hospitals continued operating normally. Police officers responded to routine calls. Families prepared for ordinary days. No emergency warnings appeared on television or radio broadcasts. No one had been instructed to avoid Tylenol. No recalls had been announced. There was no reason for fear because there was no indication that a killer had already placed poison medicine into the hands of unsuspecting consumers. The first death would initially appear to be an isolated medical tragedy. The second would seem equally mysterious. Only after multiple victims collapsed under remarkably similar circumstances would investigators begin to realize that they were confronting something unprecedented. By then, however, precious hours had already passed, and more poison bottles remained somewhere on store shelves and inside family medicine cabinets across the Chicago area. Every minute that passed increased the possibility that another unsuspecting person might reach for a familiar bottle in search of relief from a headache, a fever, or a sore throat, never realizing that the next swallow could be their last. What began as a seemingly ordinary autumn morning was quietly becoming the opening chapter of a criminal case that would challenge investigators, terrify a nation, transform the pharmaceutical industry, and remain unsolved more than 40 years later. Before authorities understood that they were searching for a murderer, a 12-year-old girl named Mary Kellerman was waking up with nothing more than a sore throat, unaware that within minutes she would become the first known victim of one of the most infamous unsolved crimes in American history. By the morning of September 29, 1982, there was no indication that anything unusual was unfolding in Elk Grove Village, a quiet suburban community northwest of downtown Chicago. Like countless neighborhoods across the United States, it was a place where ordinary routines defined daily life. Children prepared for school, parents headed to work, and families trusted that the familiar rhythm of another weekday would continue uninterrupted. There were no emergency bulletins, no public health warnings, and certainly no reason to suspect that a product sitting inside thousands of American medicine cabinets had already become a lethal weapon. Among the families beginning their day was the Kellerman family, who had no idea they were about to become part of one of the most tragic and historically significant criminal cases in modern American history. 12-year-old Mary Kellerman had developed what appeared to be nothing more than a minor illness. She was suffering from a sore throat, a common complaint that countless parents encounter every year. There was nothing about her symptoms that suggested a medical emergency. Like many children her age, Mary expected that a little rest and a common pain reliever would help her feel better. Her parents reacted exactly as millions of parents would have done under the same circumstances. They reached for a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol, one of the most trusted over-the-counter medications in the country. The bottle had been purchased only a few days earlier from a local store. There was no visible damage to its packaging, no unusual odor escaping from the bottle, and no warning that anything inside had been altered. It appeared exactly as every other bottle of Tylenol did in homes across America. Mary swallowed a capsule with a small amount of water before heading toward the bathroom to continue getting ready for the day. It was an ordinary moment, so routine that it would likely have been forgotten within hours had everything proceeded normally. Instead, only minutes later, the quiet of the morning was shattered. Her parents heard a loud noise coming from the bathroom. When they rushed to investigate, they found Mary collapsed on the floor. She was still alive, but something was terribly wrong. Her condition deteriorated with alarming speed. She appeared weak, her body began to convulse, and the symptoms unfolding before her parents' eyes bore little resemblance to those of a simple illness or even a typical medical emergency. An ambulance was called immediately. Paramedics transported Mary to Election Brothers Hospital as medical personnel worked urgently to understand what had caused such a sudden collapse. The speed of her decline puzzled everyone involved. Children do not typically collapse within minutes of taking a common pain reliever, and nothing about Mary's medical history immediately pointed doctors toward an obvious explanation. Physicians considered several possibilities. They questioned whether she might be experiencing an allergic reaction. Others wondered if she had suffered a stroke despite her young age. There was even speculation about the possibility of an undiagnosed congenital heart condition. None of these theories fully explained what they were witnessing, but at that moment, no one had any reason to suspect deliberate poisoning. As doctors continued their efforts, Mary's condition continued to worsen. Despite emergency treatment, she died several hours later. For her family, the loss was unimaginable. A morning that had begun with a child complaining of a sore throat had ended with the death of their 12-year-old daughter. The tragedy appeared both sudden and inexplicable. It still seemed to belong solely to one grieving family. Medical professionals searched for answers within the boundaries of conventional medicine because there was no indication that a criminal act had occurred. The possibility that a commercially available medication had been intentionally contaminated seemed almost impossible. While the Kellerman family struggled to comprehend their devastating loss, another ordinary day was unfolding elsewhere in the Chicago metropolitan area. Miles away, 27-year-old Adam Janis had completed his workday as a postal employee. Like Mary, Adam's complaint was neither unusual nor alarming. He had developed a headache after work, the sort of discomfort that countless adults experience every day. Without hesitation, he reached for extra-strength Tylenol kept inside his home. It was the logical choice, the same decision millions of Americans made regularly without fear. Adam swallowed the medication expecting relief, but instead he experienced something far more frightening. Within only a few minutes, his condition changed dramatically. According to the information later gathered during the investigation, he complained that something felt terribly wrong. Severe chest pain followed almost immediately. His body began reacting violently. He suffered convulsions, and before long his heart stopped. Emergency medical personnel transported him to the hospital, but despite every effort to save him, Adam also died. To doctors treating Adam, the circumstances remained deeply confusing. His sudden collapse seemed medically extraordinary, but there was still no apparent connection to the death of Mary Kellerman earlier that same day. Patients sometimes die unexpectedly from previously undiagnosed medical conditions. Rare illnesses occasionally present themselves with devastating speed. Without additional evidence linking the two cases, physicians viewed Adam's death as another isolated tragedy, heartbreaking but unrelated. What no one realized was that two people who had never met each other had died within hours after, taking the same brand of medication. The similarity remained hidden because hospitals, emergency responders, and investigators had not yet connected the cases. There was no central warning system alerting every emergency room that unusual deaths might share a common source. Each hospital focused on its own patient. Each family mourned in isolation. The pattern had not yet emerged. As the hours passed, the Janis family gathered following Adam's death. Relatives arrived to comfort one another and begin coping with the overwhelming shock of losing a young family member so unexpectedly. The atmosphere inside the home was filled with grief, confusion, and unanswered questions. Like the physicians treating Adam, the family had no explanation for what had happened. The bottle of Tylenol remained inside the house, sitting unnoticed among ordinary household items. No one suspected that it represented the true danger. Then the unimaginable happened. During the family gathering, Adam's younger brother, Stanley Janis, developed a headache. Seeking relief, he reached for the same bottle of extra-strength Tylenol that Adam had used earlier. There was no reason for him to hesitate. The medication had not been recalled. Authorities had issued no public warnings. To Stanley, it was simply a bottle of medicine that had always been considered safe. Only minutes after swallowing the capsules, Stanley's condition began to deteriorate with terrifying speed. He started vomiting violently. Breathing became increasingly difficult. His ability to speak diminished as his body reacted to the poison. Family members initially struggled to understand what they were witnessing. The emotional shock of Adam's death was still fresh, and some believed Stanley might be suffering from the overwhelming stress of losing his brother. The possibility that the medication itself could be responsible remained almost inconceivable. As panic spread through the house, another member of the family, Teresa Janis, also took Tylenol from the very same bottle after feeling unwell. Like Adam and Stanley before her, she had absolutely no reason to believe she was placing herself in mortal danger. Within minutes, Teresa also collapsed after developing symptoms strikingly similar to those affecting Stanley. Both were rushed to the hospital in desperate attempts to save their lives. Despite emergency medical intervention, neither survived. In less than 24 hours, 3 members of the same family had died after taking medicine from a single bottle. The statistical improbability of such an event immediately forced doctors to reconsider their earlier assumptions. This could no longer be explained as a coincidence or a series of unrelated medical emergencies. Something connected these deaths, and whatever that connection was, it posed an immediate threat to the public. For the first time, physicians began asking a crucial question. What did all of the victims have in common? The answer appeared deceptively simple. Each of them had taken extra-strength Tylenol shortly before collapsing. That observation would transform what had initially seemed like isolated medical mysteries into the opening stages of one of the largest criminal investigations in American history. Within hours, investigators would begin examining the bottles themselves, a decision that would reveal the horrifying truth hidden inside seemingly ordinary capsules and expose a method of murder unlike anything America had ever encountered. By the evening of September 29, 1982, what had initially appeared to be a series of unrelated medical emergencies was becoming something far more alarming. The deaths of Mary Kellerman and Adam Janis had already puzzled doctors, but the loss of Stanley Janis and Teresa Janis transformed confusion into urgent suspicion. 3 members of the same family had died within less than 24 hours after taking medication from the same bottle of extra-strength Tylenol. Such a sequence could not be dismissed as coincidence. Physicians, emergency personnel, and investigators were suddenly forced to confront a possibility that almost no one had previously considered. If the common factor was not the victims themselves, perhaps it was the medicine they had taken. That realization marked the turning point of the entire case. It shifted the focus away from rare medical conditions and toward the bottle that had quietly remained inside the Janis family home. For investigators, that ordinary bottle of pain reliever would soon become the most important piece of evidence in America. Medical staff carefully reviewed what little information they had available. Each victim had developed symptoms with astonishing speed after swallowing extra-strength Tylenol. The progression was remarkably similar from case to case. Within only a few minutes, individuals who had expected relief from a headache or sore throat instead experienced sudden and catastrophic physical collapse. Severe distress rapidly gave way to convulsions, difficulty breathing, and cardiac failure. The speed of the deterioration suggested exposure to an extremely powerful toxic substance rather than an ordinary illness. Yet identifying that substance required physical evidence, and all attention now centered on the Tylenol capsules themselves. The bottle recovered from the Janis residence was transferred for examination. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about its appearance. It looked exactly like countless other bottles sitting in medicine cabinets throughout the country. The label was familiar. The cap appeared normal. There were no obvious signs of damage or tampering. Had someone picked it up from a store shelf? they would have had no reason to suspect that anything inside had been altered. This ordinary appearance made the bottle all the more frightening because it suggested that whatever had happened was completely invisible to consumers. During the examination, one experienced investigator noticed something unusual after the bottle was opened. There was a faint odor resembling bitter almonds. Not everyone can detect this scent, but for those familiar with toxicology, it has long been associated with cyanide. That observation did not immediately prove the presence of poison, but it provided investigators with their first meaningful clue. The capsules were quickly submitted for laboratory testing. The results would change the course of the investigation within hours. Laboratory analysis confirmed that the capsules did not contain only their intended medication. Instead, they contained potassium cyanide, one of the most rapidly acting poisons known. Investigators discovered that the amount of cyanide inside the altered capsules measured several hundred milligrams, many times greater than the quantity capable of causing death. This was not accidental contamination. It was a deliberate and overwhelming dose designed to ensure that anyone swallowing the capsule had little chance of survival. For the first time, authorities understood that they were not investigating unexplained medical deaths. They were investigating murder. The discovery immediately explained the terrifying speed with which the victims had deteriorated. Potassium cyanide acts by preventing the body cells from using oxygen to produce the energy necessary for survival. Even when oxygen remains present in the bloodstream, the cells become unable to utilize it effectively. Organs with the highest demand for energy, particularly the brain and the heart, begin to fail within minutes. Victims may initially experience dizziness or nausea before rapidly progressing to difficulty breathing. Convulsions, severe disturbances of heart rhythm, cardiac arrest, or respiratory failure. Because the poison acts so quickly, survival depends upon immediate recognition and specialized treatment. In these cases, no one suspected poisoning until it was already too late. The victims believed they had taken medicine. Doctors believed they were confronting unexplained medical emergencies. Precious minutes disappeared before anyone realized that poison had entered their bodies. As soon as cyanide was confirmed, authorities recognized that every remaining bottle of extra-strength Tylenol represented a potential danger. The investigation immediately expanded beyond the Janus family and the hospitals where the victims had been treated. Police departments, public health officials, federal agencies, and Johnson & Johnson all faced the same urgent question. How many poison bottles remained in circulation? The answer was unknown, and every passing hour increased the possibility that another unsuspecting consumer might purchase one of them. Emergency warnings were issued with extraordinary speed. Hospitals throughout the Chicago metropolitan area received immediate notification regarding the suspected poisonings. Physicians were instructed to consider cyanide exposure whenever patients presented with sudden collapse after taking Tylenol. Law enforcement agencies began tracing where the victims had purchased their medication, hoping to determine whether all of the bottles originated from a single location. At the same time, public health officials prepared urgent announcements warning residents to stop using extra-strength Tylenol until further notice. Television stations interrupted regular programming to broadcast emergency information. Radio stations repeated warnings throughout the day and night. Newspapers prepared front-page stories describing an unprecedented public health crisis. The message reaching homes across the region was simple but shocking. Do not consume any extra-strength Tylenol. Millions of Americans suddenly found themselves questioning an object they had trusted for years. Medicine cabinets that had always represented safety became sources of anxiety. Families opened bathroom cabinets, looked at familiar bottles, and wondered whether they might unknowingly contain poison. Across the Chicago area, people discarded Tylenol bottles into trash containers. unwilling to take even the smallest risk. Retailers hurried to remove the product from store shelves, leaving empty spaces where one of America's most recognizable medications had stood only hours earlier. Panic spread far more quickly than investigators could gather answers. As reports of additional deaths emerged, authorities identified another particularly significant case. Paula Prince, a 35-year-old flight attendant for United Airlines, had stopped at a Jewel food store after completing her workday. Like countless shoppers, she purchased extra-strength Tylenol along with several ordinary grocery items. There was nothing unusual about the transaction. She returned to her apartment, carrying what appeared to be perfectly normal purchases. Investigators later determined that after arriving home, Paula opened her newly purchased bottle of Tylenol and swallowed one or more capsules with water. Within minutes, she died. When police entered her apartment, they discovered a scene that would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the investigation. The open bottle of Tylenol remained nearby, and a drinking glass sat beside it. Unlike earlier cases in which crucial moments had already passed before investigators understood the significance of the medication, Paula's apartment provided a remarkably clear picture of what had happened. The evidence strongly supported the conclusion that the poison had already been inside the bottle. When she purchased it, Paula's death also reinforced another disturbing pattern. The poison bottles had not all been purchased from the same location. Other victims, including Mary Reiner and Mary McFarland, had obtained their Tylenol from different stores within the Chicago metropolitan area. As authorities mapped the purchases, they recognized that the contaminated bottles had been distributed across multiple retail locations rather than concentrated in one place. This observation carried enormous investigative importance. If contamination had occurred during manufacturing, investigators would have expected poison bottles to appear across many regions of the country and within product from a single production lot. Instead, the bottles originated from different manufacturing lots, and every confirmed poisoning occurred within the Chicago area. That evidence gradually eliminated the possibility of a factory accident or production failure. Attention shifted toward a far more disturbing explanation. Someone had likely tampered with the product after it had already left the manufacturer. Investigators began reconstructing the method they believed the killer had used. According to their developing theory, the individual purchased multiple bottles of extra-strength Tylenol from stores, opened the gelatin capsules by separating their two halves, removed the legitimate medication, filled the capsules with potassium cyanide powder, carefully reassembled them, closed the bottles, and quietly returned those bottles to store shelves. At the time, there were no tamper-evidence seals, no protective foil beneath the cap, and no shrink wrap to reveal that the bottle had previously been opened. Consumers had no practical way to detect the alteration. Every poison bottle looked identical to every safe bottle beside it. The realization was chilling. The murderer had never needed to force entry into a home, confront a victim, or even witness the deaths. The crime had been committed long before the capsules were swallowed. The victims themselves unknowingly completed the final step simply by trusting a product they had. Every reason to believe was safe. As investigators assembled these facts, one truth became painfully clear. They were searching for a killer who had left almost nothing behind except ordinary bottles sitting on ordinary store shelves. And somewhere in the Chicago area, that individual remained unidentified while the largest criminal investigation of its time was only beginning. Once laboratory testing confirmed that the extra-strength Tylenol capsules contained potassium cyanide, the investigation expanded at a pace rarely seen in American criminal history. What had begun as several unexplained deaths rapidly evolved into a nationwide emergency involving local police departments, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Food and Drug Administration, public health officials, and Johnson & Johnson itself. Every hour mattered. Authorities did not know how many contaminated bottles remained on store shelves or inside family medicine cabinets, and they could not determine whether the killer had already completed the attack or intended to poison additional products. Unlike most homicide investigations, detectives were not searching for a crime scene that had already been secured. Instead, they were racing against time to prevent future murders that could occur anywhere another poison capsule was swallowed. The challenge was unlike anything law enforcement had previously encountered. There was no known suspect, no eyewitness who had seen someone tampering with bottles, and no direct connection between the victims other than the medication they had taken. The murderer had remained completely invisible. Authorities quickly organized one of the largest investigative efforts of the era. More than 200 investigators became involved, bringing together the resources of the FBI, Illinois law enforcement agencies, and federal regulators. Hospitals shared medical information. Police departments coordinated reports from multiple jurisdictions throughout the Chicago metropolitan area. The FDA worked alongside investigators to determine whether the contamination could have occurred during manufacturing, transportation, or distribution. Johnson & Johnson immediately became a critical participant, providing production records and assisting investigators in tracing the movement of Tylenol products from factories to retail stores. Every available piece of information was collected, compared, and analyzed in the hope that some overlooked detail might reveal how the poison had entered the capsules. One of the investigation's earliest priorities was determining whether the contamination had originated inside the manufacturing process. At first glance, that possibility appeared reasonable. If poison capsules had somehow entered production, then countless bottles across the country might present an immediate danger. Investigators carefully examined production records, shipment information, and manufacturing procedures. They compared the bottles recovered from the victims' homes, searching for shared characteristics that might indicate a common source. However, the evidence quickly began pointing away from the factory. The contaminated bottles came from different production lots rather than a single manufacturing batch. If a production error had occurred, investigators would have expected poison bottles from the same lot to appear in many regions across the United States. Instead, every confirmed fatal poisoning had occurred within the Chicago metropolitan area. This geographical concentration became one of the strongest pieces of evidence against the theory of factory contamination. As investigators eliminated the manufacturing process as the source, a far more disturbing explanation emerged. Someone had almost certainly tampered with the product after it had already reached retail stores. That conclusion forced detectives to rethink the entire structure of the investigation. Rather than focusing on factory employees or transportation networks, they now had to consider public spaces where ordinary consumers shopped every day. Grocery stores, pharmacies, and other retail outlets suddenly became potential crime scenes. Yet these locations presented enormous difficulties. Hundreds of customers entered and left each day. Security camera technology in 1982 was limited compared with modern standards, and many stores had no comprehensive surveillance systems capable of identifying someone quietly opening bottles and placing them back on shelves. Even if such footage had existed, investigators still would have needed to know precisely when the tampering occurred, something they could not determine with certainty. The pattern of purchases made the investigation even more complex. Victims had purchased Tylenol from different retail locations throughout the Chicago area. Paula Prince had bought her bottle at a Jewel food store shortly before returning home, where she died after taking the medication. Other victims obtained their bottles from different stores. This distribution strongly suggested that multiple bottles had been placed in multiple locations. Investigators considered the likelihood that the individual responsible had deliberately spread contaminated products across several stores in order to increase the chances that unsuspecting consumers would purchase them. Such a strategy required planning rather than impulse. It also meant the killer could have visited numerous stores without drawing attention. Opening and resealing bottles required little effort because no tamper-evident packaging existed at the time. A person standing quietly in a store aisle would not necessarily appear suspicious, particularly if they were carrying products they intended to purchase. Investigators reconstructed what they believed had most likely occurred, according to the working theory supported by the evidence. The perpetrator first purchased several bottles of extra-strength Tylenol. Away from public view, the gelatin capsules could be separated into two halves by hand. The original medication inside was removed and replaced with potassium cyanide powder. The capsules were then carefully reassembled and returned to the bottles. Once the bottles appeared normal again, they were quietly placed back onto store shelves. Customers who later purchased them had no practical means of recognizing that anything had changed. Every capsule looked identical to those that remained untouched. The bottles appeared factory sealed because no protective seals existed. In effect, the killer had transformed ordinary consumer trust into the final stage of the crime. As investigators followed every available lead, the scale of the inquiry continued to grow. Tens of thousands of individuals were interviewed. Detectives spoke with store employees, pharmacists, warehouse personnel, delivery workers, customers, and anyone who might have handled Tylenol products before the poisonings were discovered. Thousands of medicine samples underwent examination in laboratories to determine whether additional contaminated capsules remained in circulation. Every recovered bottle became potential evidence. Every report of illness following Tylenol use demanded immediate attention. Law enforcement agencies faced the difficult task of separating genuine poisonings from the widespread fear that now affected millions of Americans. Public reaction intensified as emergency warnings spread through television broadcasts, radio reports, and newspaper headlines. Authorities urged citizens not to consume extra-strength Tylenol under any circumstances until further notice. Families responded immediately. Across Chicago and eventually throughout the country, medicine cabinets were opened, and bottles that had been trusted for years were thrown away. Many people refused to keep any Tylenol products inside their homes regardless of where or when they had been purchased. Pharmacies removed the medication from shelves. Grocery stores cleared display racks. Empty spaces where Tylenol had once been prominently displayed became visible reminders of the crisis unfolding across the nation. Johnson & Johnson responded with extraordinary measures. Although investigators had found no evidence that contamination occurred during manufacturing, the company recognized that public confidence had collapsed. Approximately 31 million bottles of Tylenol were recalled nationwide, representing one of the largest product recalls in American history at that time. Production was suspended and advertising campaigns stopped. The financial impact exceeded $100 million based on the value at the time. But company officials faced a far greater challenge than financial loss. The reputation of one of America's most trusted brands now depended upon restoring public confidence. While cooperating fully with investigators attempting to identify an unknown murderer, despite the enormous resources committed to the investigation, detectives encountered a problem that would define the case for decades. The killer had left remarkably little forensic evidence. There were no usable fingerprints capable of identifying the individual responsible. There was no DNA evidence linking a suspect to the poison capsules. The crime itself created almost no direct interaction between the perpetrator and the victims. Traditional homicide investigations often rely upon relationships, motives, or physical encounters connecting offender and victim. In this case, none of those investigative pathways existed. The victims had been selected randomly through consumer behavior rather than personal association. They did not know one another. They had no shared workplace, neighborhood, or social connection beyond purchasing the same product. The murderer remained entirely separate from those who ultimately died. As weeks passed, investigators continued examining every possible explanation. They analyzed purchase locations, reconstructed distribution routes, and evaluated numerous leads from members of the public. The extraordinary media attention generated thousands of tips. Some appeared promising at first, but ultimately produced no evidence. Others reflected understandable public anxiety rather than reliable information. Detectives followed each lead because the possibility remained that even a minor observation might reveal the identity of the person responsible. Yet every avenue eventually reached the same frustrating conclusion. There was insufficient evidence to identify the killer. The investigation had become a race not only against an unknown suspect, but also against the gradual disappearance of evidence. Retail environments changed. Products were removed from shelves. Customers struggled to remember precisely when they had purchased medicine or what they had noticed. During routine shopping trips, memories faded even as investigators continued interviewing witnesses. The poisoned capsules themselves had already fulfilled their deadly purpose, leaving behind little more than unanswered questions. Unlike crimes involving prolonged contact between offender and victim, this case offered almost no opportunity for witnesses to observe suspicious behavior directly connected to the deaths. Still, authorities refused to abandon the search. Every contaminated bottle recovered strengthened their understanding of how the murders had been committed, even if it failed to identify who had committed them. The investigation had already transformed from an emergency response into one of the largest unsolved criminal cases in American history. Before long, one individual would emerge as the most widely discussed suspect, not because investigators could prove he had poisoned the Tylenol, but because he attempted to exploit the national crisis for his own purposes. His name was James W. Lewis, and although his actions would place him under intense scrutiny, they would also demonstrate just how difficult it was to distinguish between opportunism and guilt in a case defined by uncertainty. As the investigation continued, the enormous amount of public attention surrounding the Chicago Tylenol murders created an environment in which every new lead attracted immediate scrutiny. Newspapers across the United States published daily updates. Television broadcasts followed each development closely, while radio stations repeated public safety announcements reminding people not to consume extra-strength Tylenol. Millions of Americans were searching for answers, and investigators faced increasing pressure to identify whoever had transformed an ordinary household medicine into a deadly weapon. Despite the unprecedented scale of the investigation, however, authorities still lacked the one element that every homicide investigation ultimately depends upon: a suspect supported by convincing evidence. Thousands of interviews have been conducted, countless leads have been reviewed, and contaminated bottles had been carefully examined. Yet the individual responsible for placing potassium cyanide inside the capsules remained unknown. It was during this period of uncertainty that one name began appearing repeatedly in reports. Connected to the case, James W. Lewis. Although his actions drew enormous attention from investigators and the public alike, they also illustrated the difference between suspicious behavior and legally provable responsibility for murder. Lewis entered the investigation not because witnesses had seen him tampering with Tylenol bottles or because forensic evidence connected him to the poisonings, but because he sent a letter to Johnson & Johnson after the death had already become national news. In a letter, he demanded $1 million, claiming that payment would stop the poisonings. At first glance, such a message naturally appeared alarming. Investigators had every reason to take it seriously. If someone claimed to possess the power to prevent additional deaths, Authorities could not simply dismiss the possibility that the writer was directly involved. The letter immediately transformed Lewis into one of the most closely examined individuals connected with the case. The FBI launched an extensive investigation into the extortion attempt. Every available piece of information relating to Lewis was carefully reviewed. Investigators examined the contents of the letter, the circumstances under which it had been sent, and any potential connection between Lewis and the poisoned Tylenol bottles. Given the nationwide panic surrounding the murders, law enforcement understood that any credible lead deserved thorough examination. The stakes remained extraordinarily high because authorities still could not determine whether additional poison bottles might exist somewhere beyond those already discovered. If Lewis truly possessed knowledge of the murders, identifying his role could potentially prevent further loss of life. As investigators continued examining the evidence, however, an important distinction gradually emerged. Although the extortion letter attempted to exploit the fear created by the poisonings, investigators were unable to establish that Lewis had actually carried out the murders themselves. According to the findings described during the investigation, the FBI concluded that Lewis had primarily attempted to profit from an existing tragedy rather than create it. His demand for $1 million constituted a serious federal crime. But proving extortion required a different standard of evidence than proving multiple counts of murder. Authorities ultimately determined that while the letter justified criminal prosecution for extortion, it did not provide sufficient evidence to accuse Lewis of poisoning the Tylenol capsules. Lewis was subsequently convicted for extortion. However, he was never charged with the murders of the 7 victims. Throughout the years that followed, he consistently denied any involvement in the poisonings. Investigators continued to examine the possibility that he might somehow have been connected to the crimes. But no evidence emerged that met the legal standard necessary to prosecute him for homicide. The distinction remained critically important. Public suspicion alone cannot replace evidence, and despite decades of speculation, authorities never established that Lewis was the unknown individual who had contaminated the medication. He died in 2023, and with his death, one of the most publicly recognized figures associated with the investigation could no longer answer questions or provide additional information. Yet even after his passing, the central mystery remained exactly where it had stood in 1982. The identity of the poisoner was still unknown. While investigators pursued every possible lead, Johnson & Johnson faced a crisis unlike anything previously experienced by a major consumer healthcare company. Although evidence strongly indicated that the contamination occurred after the products had reached retail stores rather than during manufacturing, restoring public confidence required decisive action. The company announced the recall of approximately 31 million bottles of Tylenol across the United States. The scale of the recall was unprecedented. Shelves that had once displayed one of America's most popular pain relievers suddenly stood empty as retailers removed the product from circulation. Consumers who had purchased Tylenol were instructed to stop using it immediately and dispose of existing bottles. For many families, this marked the first time they had ever questioned the safety of a nationally recognized consumer product. The financial consequences were enormous. Johnson & Johnson absorbed losses exceeding $100 million based on the value of the recall at the time. Production of Tylenol was temporarily suspended, and advertising campaigns were halted. Yet beyond the financial impact lay an even greater challenge. Trust, once broken, cannot be restored through advertising alone. Millions of Americans had watched news reports describing ordinary people who died after taking medicine they believed was completely safe. Rebuilding confidence required changes not merely in public messaging, but in the physical design of consumer products themselves. The murders triggered sweeping changes throughout the pharmaceutical industry and eventually influenced the packaging of many other consumer goods. Before 1982, bottles of over-the-counter medication generally lacked meaningful protection against tampering. A person could open a bottle, alter its contents, close it again, and return it to a shelf without leaving obvious signs of interference. The Chicago Tylenol murders exposed that vulnerability with devastating clarity. In response, the Food and Drug Administration introduced requirements for tamper-evident packaging on non-prescription medications. Manufacturers adopted multiple protective barriers designed to reveal whether a product had been opened before purchase. Foil seals beneath bottle caps, shrink-wrap coverings around lids, adhesive safety labels, and other visible security features gradually became standard throughout the industry. These changes did not eliminate every possible risk, but they dramatically increased the difficulty of secretly altering products after manufacturing. Legislative changes followed as well. The tragedy prompted stronger legal penalties for individuals who intentionally tamper with consumer products. Lawmakers recognized that poisoning commercially available goods posed a unique threat because it targeted the public indiscriminately rather than specific individuals. A single contaminated product could potentially harm anyone who purchased it, making such crimes fundamentally different from traditional acts of violence directed toward known victims. The legal system adapted accordingly, reflecting the extraordinary danger demonstrated by the Tylenol murders. Perhaps the most enduring consequence of the case lies not in the investigation itself, but in the lasting transformation of everyday behavior. Today, consumers routinely examine safety seals before opening medicine, food, beverages, and numerous other packaged products. Most people perform this small inspection almost automatically, rarely considering why the habit exists. The protective barriers now found on countless items are quiet reminders of 7 lives lost during only a few days in late September and early October of 1982. They represent lessons learned through tragedy, preserving the memory of victims whose deaths reshaped product safety standards around the world. Yet despite these lasting reforms, the central question remains unanswered. Who placed potassium cyanide inside the Tylenol capsules? Why were random strangers selected as victims? What motivated someone to commit murders without ever meeting those whose lives would be taken? More than 4 decades of investigation have failed to produce definitive answers. Thousands of interviews, extensive forensic examinations, cooperation among local and federal agencies, and years of continued investigative effort have not identified the individual responsible. Unlike many famous criminal cases, there was no courtroom trial establishing guilt, no confession explaining motive, and no final verdict bringing legal closure to grieving families. The Chicago Tylenol murders continue to occupy a unique place in American criminal history because they challenge many assumptions about how violent crime is committed. The murderer did not need to force entry into a home, threaten victims face-to-face, or even remain nearby after preparing the poison bottles. The weapon was an everyday consumer product trusted by millions. The victims were selected entirely by chance, connected only through the ordinary decision to purchase a familiar brand of medicine. That randomness created fear extending far beyond the Chicago metropolitan area because every household recognized how easily any family could have experienced the same tragedy. More than 40 years later, the names of Mary Kellerman, Adam Janus, Stanley Janus, Teresa Janus, Mary Reiner, Mary McFarland, and Paula Prince remain at the heart of an investigation that has never reached its final chapter. Their deaths transformed the relationship between consumers and the products they use every day, leading to permanent changes that continue to protect millions of people. At the same time, the unknown individual responsible for contaminating those capsules has never been identified or convicted. The case stands as one of the most haunting unsolved murders in American history, not only because 7 innocent lives were lost, but because the person responsible vanished into anonymity, leaving behind a legacy of grief, caution, and unanswered questions that endures to this day. More than 4 decades have passed since the Chicago Tylenol murders shocked the United States. Yet the case continues to occupy a singular place in the history of American crime. Many notorious criminal investigations are remembered because of the identity of the offender, the scale of the violence, or the dramatic conclusion reached in a courtroom. This case is remembered for the opposite reason. There has been no murder conviction, no definitive identification of the person responsible, and no complete explanation for why 7 innocent people lost their lives. Instead, the legacy of the Chicago Tylenol murders is measured by the profound changes it forced upon society and by the enduring questions that investigators have never been able to answer. It remains one of the clearest examples of how a single criminal act can permanently reshape public expectations about safety, even when the individual behind the crime is never found. One of the most unsettling aspects of the case is the complete randomness of the victims. Traditional homicide investigations often reveal some connection between offender and victim. The individuals involved may know one another through family relationships, workplaces, neighborhoods, financial disputes, or personal conflicts. Those connections frequently provide investigators with motives and investigative pathways. In the Chicago Tylenol murders, no such relationship existed. Mary Kellerman, a 12-year-old girl suffering from a sore throat, had nothing in common with Adam Janus, a 27-year-old postal worker returning home with a headache. Stanley Janus and Teresa Janus became victims only because they unknowingly used the same bottle of medication during a family gathering after Adam's death. Paula Prince, a 35-year-old United Airlines flight attendant, simply purchased Tylenol after work before returning to her apartment. Mary Reiner and Mary McFarland likewise became victims through ordinary daily routines. None of these individuals knew each other. None shared a common destination or occupation. Their only connection was their trust in a product that millions of Americans considered completely safe. That randomness remains one of the principal reasons the case continues to resonate decades later. It demonstrated that ordinary routines could unexpectedly become fatal when a trusted consumer product was deliberately altered. The victims were not selected because of who they were, but because of what they unknowingly purchased. The murders, therefore, challenged assumptions about personal safety in a way that few other criminal cases have done. They suggested that danger could exist not only in isolated places or suspicious encounters, but also within ordinary household items used every day without hesitation. This realization generated fear extending far beyond the Chicago metropolitan area. Families across the United States looked inside medicine cabinets that had always symbolized care and protection and suddenly wondered whether similar dangers might exist elsewhere. The psychological impact spread much faster than the physical crime itself. Although investigators eventually concluded that the poison bottles had been tampered with after leaving the manufacturer, that distinction offered limited reassurance during the crisis. Consumers generally do not observe every stage of a product's journey from factory to retail shelf. What mattered to the public was that an apparently unopened bottle purchased from a familiar store had become deadly. Confidence in the product collapsed almost immediately, illustrating how fragile consumer trust can become once safety is called into question. The nationwide recall of approximately 31 million bottles of Tylenol represented not only a practical response to the immediate danger, but also an acknowledgement that restoring confidence required visible action. The recall became one of the defining moments in American consumer protection, demonstrating that public safety had to take precedence over financial considerations when lives were at risk. The reforms that followed remain among the most visible and enduring consequences of the case. Before 1982, tamper-evident packaging was not a standard feature of over-the-counter medications. Consumers expected that products placed on store shelves were safe simply because they came from established manufacturers. The Tylenol murders revealed the vulnerability of that assumption. In response, the Food and Drug Administration required protective packaging that would immediately reveal whether a product had been opened before purchase. Foil seals beneath bottle caps, shrink-wrap coverings around lids, adhesive seals, and other visible safeguards gradually became standard throughout the pharmaceutical industry. Over time, similar protections expanded beyond medicine to numerous consumer products, reflecting the broader lesson that packaging itself could become an important component of public safety. Legislative changes reinforced these physical protections. Laws imposing stronger penalties for product tampering recognized that crimes involving consumer goods posed extraordinary risks because they targeted the public indiscriminately. Unlike offenses directed at specific individuals, product tampering can expose countless unsuspecting people to danger without requiring direct contact between offender and victim. The legal system responded by treating such conduct with increased seriousness, acknowledging the widespread harm that could result from even a single contaminated product reaching store shelves. These reforms formed an essential part of the case's lasting legacy, ensuring that the tragedy influenced not only manufacturing practices but also criminal law. Yet despite these significant achievements in public safety, the investigation itself remains incomplete. More than 40 years after the poisonings, no individual has been prosecuted or convicted for the murders. Thousands of interviews, extensive laboratory examinations, cooperation among federal and state agencies, and years of investigative effort produced no definitive identification of the person who placed potassium cyanide inside the Tylenol capsules. James W. Lewis, whose extortion letter drew national attention, was convicted only for extortion. Authorities concluded that they lacked evidence connecting him to the poisonings themselves, and he consistently denied involvement until his death in 2023. His case illustrates an important principle within criminal investigations. Suspicion alone cannot substitute for proof. Without evidence sufficient to satisfy legal standards, investigators could not charge him with the murders. Consequently, the central mystery remained unresolved. The absence of a definitive resolution has allowed the case to remain an enduring subject of discussion among investigators, historians, legal scholars, and the general public. Yet regardless of speculation, one fact has remained unchanged since the earliest days of the investigation. The available evidence has never identified the killer. The motives behind the poisonings, therefore, remain unknown. Whether the murders were intended to create widespread panic, target a corporation, or achieve another objective has never been established. Investigators considered various possibilities over the years, but none could be proven based on the available evidence. As a result, the case stands not as a story of answers, but as a reminder of the limits that even the largest investigations sometimes encounter. For the families of the victims, those unanswered questions carry a deeply personal significance. Public attention often focuses on the mystery itself, but at the center of the case remain 7 individuals whose lives ended unexpectedly after performing one of the most ordinary actions imaginable. Mary Kellerman never returned to school after taking medicine for a sore throat. Adam Janis never recovered from the headache that followed his workday. Stanley Janis and Teresa Janis lost their lives while grieving a family member, unaware that the same bottle responsible for one tragedy would soon cause 2 more. Paula Prince returned home after work expecting an ordinary evening, but instead became another victim within minutes of opening a newly purchased bottle. Mary Reiner and Mary McFarland likewise became part of a case that forever altered American consumer safety. Their stories serve as reminders that behind every historic investigation are real people whose families continue to live with loss long after public attention has faded. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Chicago Tylenol murders is that nearly everyone living today has experienced its consequences, even if they have never heard the names of the victims. Every time someone twists open a medicine bottle and checks the protective seal beneath the cap, they are benefiting from changes introduced because of this tragedy. Every shrink-wrapped lid, every foil barrier, and every tamper-evident package reflects lessons learned through the deaths of 7 innocent people in the autumn of 1982. These safety features have become so familiar that many consumers rarely stop to consider why they exist. Their quiet presence in pharmacies and homes across the world represents perhaps the most enduring memorial to those who lost their lives. The Chicago Tylenol murders remain one of the most haunting unsolved cases in American history because they demonstrate that not every investigation reaches a satisfying conclusion. Some crimes leave behind convictions, courtroom testimony, and clear explanations. Others leave only evidence, unanswered questions, and lasting change. This case belongs firmly to the latter category. It reminds us that public trust, once broken, can transform industries, inspire new laws, and reshape everyday behavior, even when justice remains incomplete. More than 40 years after those few devastating days between September 29th and October 1st, 1982, the unknown individual who contaminated the Tylenol capsules has never been identified. But the lessons learned from the tragedy continue to protect millions of people every single day. That paradox remains the defining legacy of the Chicago Tylenol murders, a crime that forever changed the way the world safeguards ordinary products. While the person responsible disappeared into history without ever standing before a court of law, the Chicago Tylenol murders began as a series of unexplained deaths and evolved into a national crisis. But after more than 40 years, the case remains defined by the same haunting reality that investigators faced in 1982. The identity of the person responsible remains unknown. The evidence has revealed how the crime was carried out, how the poison capsules reached consumers, and how 7 innocent people lost their lives. Yet the most important questions have never received definitive answers. Who placed potassium cyanide inside the Tylenol capsules? How did that person move through multiple stores without being identified? Why were random strangers chosen as victims? And what was the true purpose behind an act that created fear across an entire country? These questions have remained at the center of the investigation, preserving the case as one of the most famous unsolved crimes in American history. One of the greatest challenges investigators faced was the nature of the crime itself. The killer did not create a traditional crime scene. There was no single location where the murders occurred. Instead, the crime unfolded across multiple retail locations and inside private homes throughout the Chicago metropolitan area. The actual act of murder happened far away from the victims and likely long before they ever purchased the capsules. By the time authorities understood what had happened, the evidence trail had already become extremely difficult to follow. The poison bottles had traveled through ordinary commercial channels, passed through the hands of unknown individuals, and eventually reached consumers who had no reason to question their safety. This method created an unusual investigative problem. In many homicide cases, detectives begin by examining the victim's relationships, searching for conflicts, financial motives, or personal connections that might explain why someone wanted that person dead. The Tylenol victims offered no such pathway. Their deaths were not connected by personal history. They were connected only by a product purchased during normal daily activities. Investigators could not begin with the question, who wanted these people harmed? Because the evidence suggested that the victims had been selected randomly. Instead, they had to ask a much broader question. Who would commit an act designed to harm anyone who happened to purchase a specific product? The absence of a clear motive made the investigation even more difficult. Authorities considered various possibilities, including attempts to create panic, harm a company, or achieve some other objective, but none of these theories could be proven. The crime produced enormous fear and attention. Yet the person responsible left investigators without a clear explanation for why the murders occurred. The lack of motive became one of the most frustrating elements of the case, because understanding why a crime happens often helps investigators understand who may have committed it. In this case, the unknown motivation created another layer of uncertainty. The investigation examined thousands of possible sources of information. More than 1,200 investigators from multiple agencies participated in the effort. Federal authorities, including the FBI, worked alongside Illinois law enforcement and the FDA. Thousands of people were questioned. Countless bottles and capsules were examined. Investigators analyzed manufacturing information, retail distribution, and the locations where victims obtained their medication. Every detail was considered because even a small piece of evidence could potentially reveal the identity of the person responsible. However, the investigation repeatedly encountered the same obstacle. The crime produced very little direct evidence linking the poisoner to the contaminated capsules. There were no usable fingerprints that identified the individual. There was no DNA evidence available to connect a suspect to the crime. There were no witnesses who saw someone opening bottles, replacing capsules, and returning them to store shelves. The person responsible had exploited the weaknesses of the packaging system at the time and avoided the kind of direct contact that often provides investigators with critical evidence. The investigation into James W. Lewis demonstrated the difficulty of determining responsibility in a case built on limited evidence. Lewis became the most publicly recognized suspect after sending a letter to Johnson & Johnson, demanding $1 million to prevent additional poisonings. His actions were serious, and investigators determined that he was attempting to profit from the crisis. He was convicted of extortion. However, the evidence did not establish that he was responsible for placing cyanide inside the Tylenol capsules. He was never charged with the murders, and he continued to deny involvement. His case remains one of the clearest examples of how a person can become associated with a famous crime without being legally proven responsible for committing it. The distinction between suspicion and evidence is especially important in unresolved cases. Public attention often creates pressure to identify someone responsible, particularly when the crime is shocking and the victims are innocent. However, criminal investigations require proof. Authorities cannot replace unanswered questions with assumptions, regardless of how strongly the public may want a conclusion. In the Chicago Tylenol case, investigators followed evidence rather than speculation. And despite examining numerous possibilities, they never obtained enough information to identify and prosecute the killer. The passage of time has created additional challenges. In the immediate aftermath of the poisonings, investigators had access to fresh memories, active public attention, and the urgency of a nationwide search. Over the years, however, witnesses' memories naturally faded, circumstances changed, and potential sources of information became increasingly difficult to evaluate. The physical evidence available from 1982 remained limited, and the investigation could not recover what had never been collected. Modern technology has transformed many criminal investigations, particularly through advances in forensic analysis. But the passage of decades does not guarantee that every cold case can be solved. Despite these challenges, the case has never disappeared completely. The Chicago Tylenol murders continue to be remembered because of their extraordinary impact on American society and because the basic facts remain so unsettling. A person was able to take a trusted medicine, alter it, and return it to public shelves. 7 people died not because they were targeted individually, but because they unknowingly crossed paths with a product that had been deliberately corrupted. The simplicity of the method is part of what made the crime so frightening. The killer did not need advanced technology or direct confrontation. The weapon was ordinary. The victims were ordinary. The circumstances were ordinary until they were not. The case also changed how Americans think about responsibility and safety. Before 1982, many consumers assumed that products available in stores were safe simply because they came from reputable companies. The Tylenol murders revealed that safety depended not only on manufacturing quality, but also on protection throughout the entire journey from production to purchase. The tragedy forced companies, regulators, and consumers to recognize that even trusted products could be vulnerable if proper safeguards were not in place. Today, the protective packaging surrounding medicine serves as a constant reminder of what happened in Chicago. These safety measures were created because a criminal exploited a weakness that had previously gone unnoticed. While the changes that followed have prevented similar tragedies and protected countless consumers, they also preserve the memory of the 7 people who lost their lives. The improvements came from tragedy, and the reason they exist is because of the victims whose names remain connected to the case. The Chicago Tylenol murders are not only a story about an unidentified offender. They're also a story about the lives interrupted and the families left behind. The national discussion surrounding the investigation, the changes in packaging, and the search for the killer can sometimes overshadow the human cost at the center of the case. But the victims were not symbols or statistics. They were individuals who had families, routines, and ordinary hopes for the future. They were people who expected to recover from a headache or a sore throat and continue with their lives. Instead, their final moments became part of an investigation that would define an era of criminal history. More than 4 decades later, the case remains open, and the possibility of new information cannot be completely dismissed. Yet the central mystery continues to stand. The person who poisoned the Tylenol capsules succeeded in creating one of the most terrifying criminal events in American history and then disappeared without ever facing a courtroom. There was no confession, no trial, and no final explanation. Only the evidence of what happened and the lasting impact it left behind. The Chicago Tylenol murders remain a reminder that some crimes are remembered not because they reach a conclusion, but because they change the world around them. The tragedy transformed pharmaceutical safety, influenced consumer protection laws, and altered the way people interact with everyday products. But for the families of Mary Kellerman, Adam Janis, Stanley Janis, Teresa Janis, Paula Prince, Mary Reiner, and Mary McFarland, the most important question has always remained unanswered. Who was responsible for taking their loved ones away? Until that question is answered, the case will continue to stand as one of America's most unsettling mysteries, a crime that changed the nation while leaving its final chapter unwritten. The Chicago Tylenol murders were a crime unlike anything the United States had experienced before. They were not only an investigation into the deaths of 7 innocent people, but also a defining moment that changed the relationship between consumers, companies, and government regulators. Before September 1982, millions of Americans viewed over-the-counter medication as one of the safest products they could purchase. A bottle of pain reliever represented comfort, convenience, and trust. It was something parents gave to children, something adults reached for after a long day, and something families stored without hesitation inside their homes. The idea that such a familiar product could become a weapon was almost impossible for the public to comprehend. Yet that exact reality became the foundation of one of the most significant criminal cases in modern American history. The tragedy exposed a vulnerability that had existed for decades, but had rarely been considered. Medicine bottles were designed to protect the contents from damage during transportation and storage. But they were not designed to prevent deliberate interference by a criminal after reaching store shelves. At the time, consumers generally believed that if a product looked normal, it was safe. There were no protective layers beneath the cap, no visible barriers showing whether the bottle had been opened, and no obvious warning signs that something had been altered. The person responsible for the Tylenol poisonings exploited that weakness with devastating consequences. The method was terrifying because it relied on ordinary trust. The victims did not encounter a dangerous person. They did not enter an unsafe location. They did not make a risky decision. They simply purchased a medication that appeared identical to millions of other bottles across the country. The crime transformed a routine act into a moment of danger. A person could walk into a store, purchase a familiar product, return home, and unknowingly bring a deadly substance into their own household. That possibility created fear not only because of the 7 deaths themselves, but because anyone could imagine themselves or their family members in the same situation. The response from Johnson & Johnson became one of the most closely examined aspects of the case. The company faced an extraordinary crisis. Its Tylenol product was among the most trusted pain medications in the United States. But public confidence disappeared almost immediately after the poisonings became known. The company had to make decisions that affected millions of consumers and carried enormous financial consequences. Rather than attempting to minimize the danger or delay action, Johnson & Johnson removed the product from circulation on a massive scale. Approximately 31 million bottles of Tylenol were recalled nationwide. The recall represented a major financial sacrifice. The company suffered losses exceeding $100 million based on the value of the time, and production was temporarily suspended. Advertising campaigns were stopped as public attention remained focused on the deaths and the ongoing investigation. However, the significance of the response extended beyond financial calculations. The recall demonstrated a new expectation for how companies should respond during consumer safety emergencies. Protecting public safety became the priority, even when doing so required enormous economic losses. The crisis also changed the way companies thought about product protection. The Tylenol murders showed that safety could not depend only on the quality of the product itself. A medication could be manufactured correctly and still become dangerous if someone altered it afterward. This understanding changed the entire approach to packaging. Manufacturers began recognizing that packaging was not merely a way to contain a product. It was also a critical security measure designed to protect consumers. Following the tragedy, tamper-evident packaging became a new standard for many over-the-counter medications. The Food and Drug Administration required stronger protective measures, leading manufacturers to introduce additional barriers between the product and the consumer. Safety features such as foil seals beneath caps, shrink wrap coverings, seal containers, and other protective designs became common. These features allowed customers to see whether a product had been opened or interfered with before purchase. What had once been considered unnecessary became an essential part of consumer protection. The impact of the case extended beyond medicine. The principles introduced after the Tylenol murders influenced packaging practices across many industries. Companies producing various consumer goods began paying greater attention to the possibility of intentional tampering. The public expectation changed permanently. Consumers became more aware of packaging, more likely to inspect seals, and more conscious of whether a product appeared secure before use. A small action that many people perform automatically today, checking whether a package is properly sealed, exists largely because of the lessons learned from the events of 1982. The legal system also responded to the danger revealed by the case. The deliberate contamination of consumer products was recognized as an especially serious form of criminal behavior because it placed large numbers of innocent people at risk. Unlike crimes directed toward a specific victim, product tampering can affect anyone who happens to encounter the altered item. A single act can potentially create widespread harm. Stronger penalties were introduced for those who intentionally interfere with consumer products, reflecting the seriousness of the threat demonstrated by the Tylenol murders. Despite these major changes, the investigation itself remained one of frustration and uncertainty. The public wanted justice for the 7 victims, but investigators never found the person responsible. The enormous effort involving local authorities, federal agencies, and public health officials produced important discoveries about how the crime occurred, but not who committed it. The investigation revealed the method, but not the identity. It explained the weapon, but not the motive. It documented the tragedy, but could not provide the final answers families and the public wanted. The case also highlighted the limitations of even the largest criminal investigations. More than 1,200 investigators participated. Thousands of people were interviewed. Countless potential leads were examined. Yet the evidence required to identify the killer never emerged. The absence of fingerprints, DNA evidence, or direct witnesses prevented authorities from reaching the conclusion necessary for prosecution. The case became an example of how a carefully planned crime can remain unresolved despite enormous investigative resources. The mystery surrounding the offender has contributed to the lasting public fascination with the case. But the true significance of the Chicago Tylenol murders is not the unknown identity of the killer. At its center are the 7 people whose lives ended unexpectedly. Their names remain connected to a tragedy that reshaped American society. Mary Kellerman, Adam Janis, Stanley Janis, Teresa Janis, Paula Prince, Mary Reiner, and Mary McFarland. They were not chosen because of personal conflicts or because they were involved in anything dangerous. They became victims because of an ordinary purchase and a decision that millions of people make every day. For the families of the victims, the changes that followed the case could never replace what was lost. New packaging standards, stronger laws, and improved safety measures represent meaningful progress. But they cannot undo the pain caused by the deaths of loved ones. Behind every safety improvement created after the tragedy is the memory of people who never had the chance to benefit from those protections themselves. The Chicago Tylenol murders also changed how Americans viewed trust. Before the case, many people assumed that products from well-known companies were automatically safe once they reached store shelves. After the poisonings, that assumption changed. Consumers became more cautious. Companies became more responsible for protecting products beyond manufacturing. And regulators increased their focus on preventing intentional harm. The tragedy revealed that safety required cooperation between manufacturers, government agencies, retailers, and consumers. More than 40 years later, the case remains both a warning and a reminder. It is a warning about the damage a single individual can cause by exploiting weaknesses in everyday systems. It is a reminder that the response to tragedy can create lasting improvements that protect future generations. The person responsible for the Tylenol poisonings may never be identified, but the consequences of that crime continue to influence the lives of millions of people. The Chicago Tylenol murders changed America because they forced the nation to reconsider something it had taken for granted: that ordinary products used in ordinary moments were automatically safe. The tragedy brought fear into homes across the country. but it also produced reforms that made those homes safer afterward. The 7 victims remain the heart of this story, and their memory lives on through every protective seal, every safety measure, and every consumer who pauses for a moment to ensure that a product has not been compromised. The case may remain officially unsolved, but its impact is undeniable. It changed the pharmaceutical industry, influenced federal regulations, transformed consumer expectations, and created one of the most important examples of modern product safety reform. Yet beneath all of these changes remains the unanswered question that has followed investigators for decades. Who was the person responsible for turning a trusted medicine into a deadly weapon? Until that question is finally answered, the Chicago Tylenol murders will remain one of the most haunting chapters in American criminal history. More than 40 years after the Chicago Tylenol murders shocked the United States, the case remains suspended between history and mystery. The events of late September and early October 1982 created one of the largest criminal investigations of its time, changed the way Americans viewed everyday products, and transformed safety standards across the nation. Yet despite all of those consequences, one essential element remains missing: justice for the person responsible. The 7 deaths that began with a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol have never resulted in a completed prosecution for murder. There has been no courtroom moment where a jury heard the full story, no confession explaining the motive, and no final judgment identifying the individual who carried out the crime. The investigation produced answers about what happened, but not who made it happen. The story of the Chicago Tylenol murders continues to be remembered because of the contradiction at its center. The case changed America permanently, yet the person who caused that change disappeared without facing punishment. The crime had enormous consequences. It affected a major pharmaceutical company, influenced federal regulations, changed the design of consumer packaging, and altered the behavior of millions of people. But the individual responsible remained outside the reach of the justice system. That unresolved ending is one of the reasons the case continues to draw attention decades later. The victims remain the most important part of the story. Long after the headlines faded and the investigation became a historical case, the human tragedy behind the events has remained unchanged. Mary Kellerman was 12 years old when she took Tylenol for a sore throat and died shortly afterward. She was not involved in anything dangerous. She was a child experiencing an ordinary illness. Adam Janis was 27 years old, a postal worker who believed he was taking a common medication for a headache. His death led to an unimaginable family tragedy when Stanley Janis and Teresa Janis also died after taking capsules from the same bottle. Paula Prince, a 35-year-old United Airlines flight attendant, purchased Tylenol after work, unaware that the bottle she carried home contained poison. Mary Reiner and Mary McFarland also became victims of a crime they could never have anticipated. Their deaths revealed the most disturbing element of the case. The victims were selected by chance. The killer did not pursue specific individuals. There was no personal conflict, no known relationship, and no warning that any of these people were in danger. Their lives intersected only through a product that was supposed to provide relief. That randomness created a sense of fear unlike many other crimes because it removed the idea that people could protect themselves through caution or awareness. The victims were doing something completely ordinary, and that ordinary action became fatal. The investigation that followed was extraordinary in scale. More than 200 investigators worked on the case, including authorities from multiple law enforcement agencies, the FBI, and the FDA. Thousands of people were questioned. Numerous potential leads were examined. Investigators analyzed the contaminated bottles and traced where victims had purchased their medication. They determined that the poisonings did not originate from the manufacturing process because the affected bottles came from different production lots and were concentrated in the Chicago area. This discovery led authorities to conclude that the tampering occurred after the bottles reached retail locations. That conclusion explained how the murders were committed, but also created the greatest challenge in solving them. The person responsible had exploited a weakness in consumer packaging that existed at the time. Because there were no tamper-evident seals, there was no obvious indication that the bottles had been opened and altered. The killer could place the contaminated product back on his store shelves without immediately attracting attention. By the time investigators understood the method, the opportunity to identify the person who performed the tampering had already become extremely difficult. The absence of traditional evidence prevented the case from reaching a conclusion. There were no fingerprints or DNA evidence sufficient to identify the offender. No witnesses came forward with direct knowledge of someone altering the capsules. The victims had no connection that could reveal a motive. The crime was designed in a way that separated the offender from the victims, creating a distance that made the investigation unusually complex. The investigation also demonstrated the importance of separating suspicion from proof. Throughout the years, several individuals became associated with the case, but no one was ever proven responsible for the murders. James W. Lewis became the most well-known suspect after sending an extortion letter to Johnson and Johnson demanding $1 million to stop further poisonings. His actions were investigated, and he was convicted for extortion. However, authorities did not find sufficient evidence connecting him to the actual poisoning of the Tylenol capsules. He was never charged with the murders and continued to deny involvement. His case remains an example of how public attention can focus on individuals connected to a crime, without establishing legal responsibility. The lack of resolution has also influenced how the case is remembered. Many criminal investigations become historical because of their final outcome, a conviction, a confession, or a clear explanation. The Chicago Tylenol murders became historical because that final outcome never arrived. The case remains a reminder that even extensive resources and determined investigators cannot guarantee answers. Some crimes leave behind mysteries that survive for generations. However, the story of the Tylenol murders is not only about failure to identify a killer. It is also about the changes that emerged from tragedy. Before 1982, consumer protection surrounding over-the-counter medication was far different. The events in Chicago revealed the dangers of products that could be secretly altered after reaching stores. The response transformed the pharmaceutical industry. Tamper-evident packaging became a requirement for non-prescription medications, and protective features became common across many consumer products. These changes were created because of the lessons learned from the deaths of 7 people. Every Seal medicine bottle today carries part of that history. Protective packaging is often viewed as a normal feature, something people rarely think about. Yet those safety measures exist because of a crime that demonstrated what could happen without them. The tragedy forced companies and regulators to recognize that consumer safety required protection, not only during production, but also after products entered the public marketplace. The case also changed public awareness. Consumers became more attentive to packaging and more aware of the possibility of tampering. A simple inspection of a seal became a normal part of purchasing medicine. The public relationship with everyday products changed permanently. Trust remained important, but it was now accompanied by a greater understanding that safeguards were necessary. Still, the improvements that followed cannot erase the loss suffered by the victims' families. The creation of safer packaging, stronger laws, and better protections represents progress, but does not answer the questions that remain. Families were left without the complete explanation that often provides some form of closure after tragedy. They know what happened, but they do not know why. They know their loved ones died because of deliberate poisoning, but they do not know who decided to commit the crime. That uncertainty is perhaps the most painful part of the case. The investigation has established the facts surrounding the tragedy. Yet the final piece remains missing. The person responsible has never been publicly identified. The motive has never been confirmed. The reason 7 innocent people became victims remains unknown. The Chicago Tylenol murders continue to stand as one of the most unsettling unsolved cases in American history because the crime was both simple and impossible to forget. The method was simple: alter a familiar product and return it to the public. The consequences were enormous: 7 deaths, national panic, and permanent changes in consumer safety. The offender needed no direct confrontation with the victims. The victims never knew they were in danger. Their final moments were connected by an act they could never have imagined. More than 4 decades later, the case remains open in the minds of investigators, historians, and the families who continue to remember those lost. The protective seals found on medicine bottles today serve as a reminder of what happened in 1982. They represent a lesson learned through tragedy. But they also serve as a reminder that behind every safety improvement were real people whose lives ended far too soon. The Chicago Tylenol murders are ultimately a story of unanswered questions and lasting consequences. It is the story of a crime that changed an entire nation without ever revealing the identity of the person who committed it. It is the story of 7 victims whose names became connected to one of the most significant moments in American criminal history. And it is the story of a mystery that, despite decades of investigation, remains unfinished. The final chapter of the Chicago Tylenol murders has never been written. The victims have been remembered. The safety lessons have endured. The investigation has continued through history. But the person responsible remains unknown, leaving behind a question that has survived for generations. Who turned a trusted medicine into a deadly weapon, and why? Until that question is answered, the Chicago Tylenol murders will remain one of America's most haunting reminders that even the most ordinary moments can sometimes hide unimaginable danger. The Chicago Tylenol murders have remained one of the most disturbing criminal mysteries in American history because the case represents something far more unsettling than a series of deaths. It represents a moment when the ordinary world suddenly became uncertain. A bottle of medicine, something millions of people kept inside their homes without hesitation, became the center of a national nightmare. The crime demonstrated how a single individual could exploit a weakness in a trusted system and create fear across an entire country. More than 4 decades later, the investigation has never produced a final answer. But the impact of the tragedy continues to shape the way Americans think about safety, responsibility, and trust. When the first reports of unexplained deaths emerged in the Chicago area in September 1982, no one understood the scale of what was happening. The early deaths appeared unrelated. A young girl suffering from sore throat, a man experiencing a headache after work, a family suddenly losing multiple members within hours. At first, there was no obvious connection. Doctors, families, and investigators struggled to understand why apparently healthy individuals were dying so quickly. The truth only became clear when authorities discovered that the common connection was not a person, a location, or a personal conflict. It was a product. That discovery changed everything. The realization that extra-strength Tylenol capsules had been deliberately contaminated with potassium cyanide transformed a medical mystery into a criminal investigation. It also created an entirely new type of fear. The danger was not confined to a single neighborhood or a specific group of people. It existed anywhere a contaminated bottle might be waiting. The possibility that someone could unknowingly purchase a poison product created anxiety that spread far beyond Chicago. The victims represented the tragedy of ordinary life interrupted. Mary Kellerman was a 12-year-old girl whose parents expected her to recover from simple illness. Adam Janis was a postal worker who believed he was taking a familiar pain reliever for discomfort. Stanley Janis and Teresa Janis became victims while dealing with the grief of losing a family member. Paula Prince purchased Tylenol during a normal shopping trip after work. Mary Reiner and Mary McFarland also became victims through everyday decisions that should never have placed their lives at risk. Their stories remain central because they demonstrate the randomness of the crime. The person responsible did not choose victims based on identity or personal connection. There is no evidence that the victims were targeted individually. Instead, they were selected by chance, determined by which bottles they purchased and when they consumed them. That randomness made the crime especially frightening because it removed the usual warnings people associate with danger. The victims were not entering an unsafe environment. They were not knowingly interacting with a threatening person. They were simply trusting a product that had been considered safe. The investigation that followed became one of the largest criminal investigations of its time. Authorities from different agencies worked together in an effort to identify the person responsible and prevent additional deaths. The FBI, Illinois law enforcement, the FDA, and other organizations contributed resources and expertise. Investigators examined thousands of pieces of information, questioned countless individuals, and analyzed products connected to the poisonings. One of the most important discoveries was that the contamination did not appear to have occurred during manufacturing. The affected bottles came from different production lots, and the poisonings were concentrated in the Chicago area. This evidence indicated that the killer had likely altered the capsules after they had already reached stores. That conclusion changed the direction of the investigation. Authorities were no longer looking for a problem inside a factory. They were searching for someone who had moved through ordinary retail environments and manipulated products before returning them to public shelves. This method created enormous investigative difficulties. The crime depended on anonymity. The person responsible did not need to interact with victims, establish relationships, or leave behind an obvious trail. The bottles passed through normal commercial systems, and by the time anyone realized they had been altered, the opportunity to observe suspicious behavior had disappeared. The killer had used the everyday nature of consumer shopping as part of the method itself. The lack of physical evidence became one of the greatest barriers to solving the case. Investigators did not obtain fingerprints or DNA evidence that could identify the offender. No witness came forward with direct knowledge of the tampering. No confession revealed the motive. The investigation provided a clear understanding of how the crime occurred, but not who committed it. Over the years, several theories and suspects received attention, but none resulted in a murder conviction. James W. Lewis remains the most recognized person connected to the investigation because of his attempt to profit from the crisis through an extortion letter sent to Johnson & Johnson. He demanded $1 million, claiming payment would prevent additional poisonings. Authorities investigated his actions and determined that he had committed extortion, leading to his conviction for that crime. However, investigators did not establish that he was responsible for placing cyanide into the Tylenol capsules. He was never charged with the murders and continued to deny involvement. The case demonstrates the importance of evidence in criminal justice. A person may attract suspicion, but suspicion alone cannot prove guilt. Investigators must establish facts strong enough to support prosecution in court. In the Chicago Tylenol case, despite enormous effort, authorities never reached that point. The absence of sufficient evidence meant that the person responsible remained beyond the reach of the justice system. Although the investigation did not produce a conviction, the case produced changes that affected millions of people. The tragedy transformed the approach to consumer safety. Before 1982, tamper-evident packaging was not a standard expectation for over-the-counter medication. After the poisonings, that changed permanently. Companies introduce protective seals and barriers designed to show whether products have been opened or altered. The Food and Drug Administration established requirements that encouraged safer packaging practices. The lessons learned from the Tylenol murders became part of everyday life. These changes represent one of the most significant legacies of the case. Every time consumers check a seal before opening medication, they are participating in a safety practice created because of the tragedy. The protective packaging found on countless products today exists because one criminal act revealed a dangerous vulnerability. The improvements that followed cannot restore the lives lost, but they have prevented similar situations and protected countless others. The case also changed corporate responsibility. Companies recognized that protecting consumers required more than producing a quality product. They had to consider every stage of a product's journey, from manufacturing to the moment it reached a customer's hands. Johnson & Johnson's nationwide recall became a defining example of crisis response, showing that consumer protection could require enormous sacrifices. Yet the improvements that followed cannot erase the unanswered questions. For the families of the victims, safety reforms and industry changes do not replace the loss of loved ones. They do not explain why the crime occurred or who is responsible. The greatest mystery remains untouched: the identity and motive of the person who contaminated the capsules. The Chicago Tylenol murders continue to survive in public memory because they represent both tragedy and transformation. They remind society of the vulnerability that can exist within ordinary systems. They also demonstrate how communities and institutions can respond when those vulnerabilities are exposed. The crime created fear, but it also produced change. It caused devastation, but it also led to protections that continue to exist today. Still, the final truth remains hidden. The person responsible has never been identified. The motive has never been confirmed. The families of the victims never received the full explanation they deserved. The investigation that began in 1982 remains one of the most famous unresolved cases in the United States. The story of the Chicago Tylenol murders is therefore not only about a criminal who disappeared. It is about the people whose lives were taken, the families who endured unimaginable loss, and the society that changed because of what happened. It is about the importance of safety, the limits of investigation, and the lasting impact of a crime that affected millions of people who never personally knew the victims. More than 40 years later, the names of Mary Kellerman, Adam Janus, Stanley Janus, Teresa Janus, Paula Prince, Mary Reiner, and Mary McFarland remain the heart of the case. Their deaths created a turning point in American consumer history, but their lives should always be remembered beyond the tragedy that followed them. They were individuals with families, routines, and futures that were suddenly taken away. The Chicago Tylenol murders remain unsolved, but they are not forgotten. The protective seals, safety regulations, and consumer awareness that exist today are lasting reminders of what happened in the autumn of 1982. They represent a promise that the lessons of those 7 deaths would not disappear with time. Yet one question continues to echo through the decades. Who was responsible for turning a trusted medicine into a deadly weapon? Until that question is answered, the shadow of the Chicago Tylenol murders will remain, a mystery without a final chapter, a crime without a conviction, and a reminder that some of the darkest moments in history can emerge from the most ordinary parts of everyday life.